So now Microsoft, or Xbox, owns the rights to Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. This is one of the worst fucking things I've ever heard in my fucking life. I fucking hate this shit. Fuck Xbox, fuck Microsoft. This company doesn't give a shit about cartoony characters or platformer characters. Their company has always been just about gun games, Call of Duty, Halo, super adult, super serious games. They never gave a flying fuck about games with pure imagination, games with that have childlike wonder to them, that had these colorful characters that people grew up with, that they love, that they're nostalgic for, that mean a lot to people in the world, that mean millions of things to people, like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. That's fucking horrible. So now just forget it, okay? All us Crash fans and Spyro fans wanting the next chapter after they both returned, that's all flushed down the goddamn toilet. So don't fucking expect Crash 5, and don't fucking expect a new Spyro game. It's not gonna fucking happen. That dream is over now. We got to have a little bit of fun when they both came back with Crash 4 and the Spyro Reignited trilogy, but that shit is dead now. You know, maybe when enough of us fans of these characters complain enough, then maybe they'll change their mind. But it's not their market. They're not Nintendo. And Nintendo is a controversial company, and I really am not a big fan of their new systems. I do like the Switch, but the old Nintendo and really what Nintendo represents, it's a company that is symbolic for all adults that still have childlike imagination, that still love the colorful cartoony worlds like Mario, and yes, even Zelda, and Donkey Kong, and all that kind of stuff, and Pokemon. That's what Nintendo represents. That's why Nintendo is amazing, because they have that quality about them. Microsoft and fucking Xbox, they never gave a fuck about that shit. Ever. What happened to Crash and Spyro now is the same shit that happened to Banjo-Kazooie and all the other colorful animal Rareware characters. History is repeating itself all over again. So now Crash and Spyro have to suffer the same fucking fate. Now they're in the hands of Xbox. Is one of the worst things ever. Why couldn't Nintendo own them? It's just such a horrible, horrible thing that has happened. I mean, this decade is so bad so far. And it's early in the decade, but still, the 2020s are fucking terrible. They suck. It's always important to keep positivity in your life. You know, like, this shit is super important to me. And it is to a lot of people. But just stay positive, because the fans can always make their own fan games of these characters, and the fans love and care about these characters. Fucking Microsoft never did, and they never cared about the characters of Rareware. They fucking saw Conker's Bad Fur Day on the N64, and they were like, oh yeah, he's an edgy squirrel character, so that's perfect for our demographic, because we're coming out with the Xbox, and everything's all about being a nasty teenager, and fuck all that cool, innocent crap. So that's why they wanted Rareware. They just wanted to hoard the characters away from Nintendo, because they knew Rareware made all these games that sold well. That's the only reason they bought them out. They brought them out to, like, shut them out. They didn't give a fuck about Banjo-Kazooie or Conker or any of these other characters. They never did give a fuck. That's the only reason they bought them. And now they own Crash and Spyro. So imagine this, and mark my words, because I mean, this could possibly happen. What if Nintendo loses money in the future? And say the Switch 2 bombs, or the next console of Nintendo bombs, and then all of a sudden, Mario is going to be fucking owned by Xbox. That's right. They'll fucking own Mario. They'll fucking buy out Sonic, probably, because even to this day, Sonic is still a pretty big name, especially with the movies now, because all these younger kids are watching the movies that never ever played the games, and they're too young and shit. So Mario and Sonic are going to get the axe as well. They're going to go into the Xbox jail with all the other iconic platformer characters that used to make video games better, like in the 90s and the early 2000s, before the reign of Xbox took over gaming and ruined everything with live gaming and people cursing at each other on games, making everything like super toxic and shitty and annoying and loud, instead of what it used to be when platformers were the king of gaming and people loved these characters and wanted to see more like imagination-fueled games with colorful worlds, planets, villains, powers and shit. But no, that's too embarrassing. That's too childish. That's too kiddie-like. Oh, that's so stupid and lame. Fucking Mario and banjo-kazooie and fucking Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. What are you, like 5 years old? That's their attitude. That's always been their attitude. And this is not a surprise, right? Because now we heard that story recently of an Xbox employee talking about how no one cares about Banjo-Kazooie. That's recent news. Other people have talked about it. Are any of you actually truly surprised? Are any of you? Wasn't this something we always knew? Of course they don't give a fuck. Of course they don't. They never did. Ever. They don't give a fuck about Banjo-Kazooie. They never fucking cared about those characters. Ever. The only reason they bought them was so that Nintendo wouldn't have these characters anymore. And that was the worst place for the Rare characters to go, is the Xbox, the Microsoft Corporation. Because their entire marketing behind the Xbox was that if you're one of the cool kids, if you're one of the mature kids, then you should be playing Xbox. That was what their entire fucking thing was, and it still is. They're not Nintendo, and they're not Sony either. Sony lost their way as well, because now they're literally the same as the Xbox, for the most part. But we shouldn't forget that when Xbox was being a bunch of bullshit in the early 2000s, the PS2 still had a lot of cartoonish games out there. Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, all the other platformer characters. So in the early 2000s, they were still trying to continue that trend where the PlayStation was for everyone. It wasn't just for the people that wanted to play the adult, mature games. And yeah, in the early 2000s, they still had new Crash and Spyro games, and they were both hit and miss. But at least they were still alive, on life support, but still alive. But now, they're back, and now they're dead. Of course. This is just horrible, horrible shit. It's like, what else is there to say? Just like, stop trying to make it seem like these companies ever cared about these characters. They never, ever did. And look what they did when they made a new Banjo-Kazooie game on the 360, like 10 million years ago. It wasn't a platformer. They fucked up Banjo-Kazooie even when they made a new one. Their designs are terrible. The gameplay is so, like, finicky and wonky and annoying, and it's just, I don't like nuts and bolts. There's aspects to it that aren't terrible, but for a Banjo-Kazooie game, it is terrible. Of course they don't know what they're doing. This company doesn't give a shit about their fans. They never did. Then again, you can say the same thing about Nintendo. But at least Nintendo was the place where these characters are supposed to be. All these cartoonish kinds of characters, they all belong on Nintendo. Fuck Xbox and PlayStation. Like, Sony stopped caring about these colorful characters when, like, the PS3 came out. They got pressured or gave up on the platformer characters when all these new mature games were coming out in the late 2000s. So Sony just gave up on them. Nintendo has always been the only fucking company in the entire history of fucking video games that kept them alive, that kept them continuing to make new titles. We still have new fucking Mario games that come out. It's still a thing. Nintendo, like, loves that shit, and it's great because they're the company that keeps video games alive. Sega did the same thing. Even though Sega as a company, they had mature games that had some blood in it, but they still had a lot of cartoonish characters like Rystar, Vector Man, Sonic, Alex Kidd, Knights. Like, Sega still cared about these cartoonish characters. But you know what the fucking problem is when it first started? Was when Crash and Spyro appeared on the Xbox. And maybe the GameCube. That was the death of, like, Crash and Spyro being the mascots for Sony. And since they decided to go public and have their games on all the systems, now, like, the legacy of Crash and Spyro, it became watered down as time went on. No longer were they the PlayStation icons they once were, where you could only play them if you owned a PlayStation system. That ended completely, and it sucked when it happened. Yes, it's great if you just owned a GameCube and you got to play Crash or Spyro on it. That's awesome, and great for you. But that really was the first sign where, oh, well, now these characters aren't really as important anymore. They don't sell game systems anymore. Because back in the day, when video games used to be more about imagination, characters like Sonic, even Alex Kidd, Mario, Bonk the Caveman for the TurboGrafx, Gex for the 3DO, these characters sold the game systems, and people wanted to play those characters. And it was amazing because it brought adults and children together, just like how the old 2D animated films used to be in the 90s. But now, that's fractured, and it's all ruined. It's getting ruined. I mean, are you all actually really honestly surprised that Xbox doesn't care about Banjo-Kazooie? I mean, of course they don't. They never did. I can't believe, like, some of you are just, like, so bewildered and you're like, oh, they don't care. Well, of course they don't. They never did. Just because they had one Banjo-Kazooie game during the 360 era. 10 million years ago, by the way. Like, 2008, guys. That's forever ago. Just because they had one new game, that doesn't mean they care about Banjo-Kazooie. They released that game out of, like, peer pressure. The only reason they put that out was because they knew some people, in their mind, some people cared about Banjo-Kazooie. But Banjo-Kazooie was never, like, something they had passion for as a company. Like, they didn't buy Rareware because they had passion for those characters and they loved those characters. They bought it out of spite because they wanted to get revenge on Nintendo because they saw how successful the Rareware games on Nintendo were. That's the only reason they bought them. They never had any true, great, grandiose, passionate reasons for what they were going to use with the characters. Just as long as they had them so that they could just, rot away in the Xbox jail. And it might happen with Mario and Sonic. You never know. 10, 20 years from now, when the Switch 5 comes out and it fails, and then they're going to own Mario. They're going to buy the Mario characters, Microsoft. And then Sonic will probably get bought in by Microsoft because that's what's going to happen. I know Microsoft isn't doing well right now. Like, their new Xbox systems, people still buy them, but there's a lot of complaints. So maybe this takeover won't happen to Mario and Sonic, but would any of you actually be surprised if that happened, though? Like, again, don't you see where this is going? This is like the end of, like, it's all these people that are usually adults and they lose that childlike wonder to them. And now they just care about mature video games. Grand Theft Auto, Halo, Call of Duty. I don't know, like, just stuff like that. And they lost their way. They lost that imagination, that pure, awesome stuff with these badass characters like Kirby, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, Gex, Bomberman, like, where the fuck is he? He's on life support right now. Mega Man, these are the kind of characters that made video games special. Video games were always special, like, in general, but, I mean, this is, like, where it's heading, guys. It's gonna be eventually the end of this cartoonish world in video games. It's not the 2000s anymore, so people don't make you feel embarrassed for liking platformers anymore like they used to. Like, they used to look down on you, like, oh, you're so embarrassing. Why are you playing that cartoonish game? You're such a lame-o loser. Like, that era's dead. That angsty kind of bullshit teenage era is dead. Thank God. But even though that's dead, if platformers don't become popular again, in 2017 they came back a year or two, but if we don't get this recognition that platformers have, then all that shit's going away. It's gonna die completely, and it's gonna be horrible when it happens. Because when that happens, then that means that you're gonna lose a lot of fans, and it could be the end of that golden pureness that gaming had in the past, where that used to be something that was special to people, is when you grew in love, you loved these characters and their adventures. It was like you were going on an adventure with the character. Alright, anyway, I've said enough. I've said my piece. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, if I'm insane or if I'm correct. But anyway, I just had to vent because I love Crash and Spyro. Crash Bandicoot is my favorite video game character, so... And Spyro is like his brother. Like Spyro and Crash are like they're brothers, and they were the brothers on PlayStation back in the day. Anyway, that's enough. My name is SuperPat98. Thank you for watching.